The holographic display flickered, casting azure light across Cadet Naomi Bushkovich's face as she stood at rigid attention. The combat simulation results glowed in damning red. Mission failure. Lethal force underutilized. Fifth consecutive failure. Cadet Bushkovich. Commander Adama's voice cut through the air with military precision as she circled the young woman. Explain yourself. Naomi maintained her forward gaze, sweat beading along her temples, despite the climate-controlled environment of Aurora's Edge, the orbital training station housing Terra Military Academy. I identified non-lethal alternatives. Commander, the civilian hostages were simulations, Adama interjected, stopping directly before Naomi. The commander's uniform shifted from standard gray to alert red, her holographic insignia pulsing with disapproval. Your hesitation cost your team precious seconds. In real combat, those seconds translate to casualties. Naomi fought to keep her expression neutral. At 24, she was older than most fifth-year cadets. Her unconventional background had delayed her entry. The humanitarian colony on Eris 9, a quarantined dwarf planet, had shaped her worldview in ways the Academy struggled to recalibrate. Your medical scores are exemplary, Adama continued, scrolling through Naomi's file on her wrist display. Top percentile in trauma surgery, xenobiology, and crisis medicine. Yet your combat efficiency. She trailed off, shaking her head. You refuse to fire when a clean shot presents itself. This academy produces soldiers, cadet, not philosophers. With respect, Commander, I joined to save lives. Sometimes, saving lives requires taking them. Adama's tone softened, almost imperceptibly. The Void Collective doesn't share your qualms about lethal force. The mention of humanity's most inscrutable enemy sent a chill through the room. For decades, the Void Collective had expanded relentlessly through the Outer Rim, leaving devastated colonies in their wake. Their motives remained unknown. Communication attempts had yielded only static and destruction. Report to Simulation Bay 7 tomorrow at 600. You'll rerun the scenario until... Adama's wrist display chimed with an encrypted alert. Her eyes narrowed as she read the message, then looked up at Naomi with sudden, penetrating interest. Well, this is unexpected. Commander, your orders have been overridden. Adama's posture stiffened subtly. You're being transferred to Project Threshold, effective immediately. Project Threshold? Naomi had never heard the designation. A covert installation, Tongan human collaborative research. Adama's voice carried a note of surprise. Apparently, you've been specifically requested. The Tongan Dominion, humanity's only interstellar ally against the Void, was known for their advanced neural technologies and ruthless military doctrine. Their interest in a combat-deficient cadet made little sense. Pack your essentials. A shuttle departs from Bay 12 in 40 minutes. Adama handed her a temporary clearance chip. These orders supersede all Academy evaluations. They've flagged you as mission critical. As Naomi saluted and turned to leave, Adama called after her. Bushkovich? Yes, Commander? Whatever they want you for. It won't be for your reluctance to pull the trigger. The sealed shuttle was cramped and windowless, intensifying Naomi's claustrophobia during the 6-hour journey. Her armed escort, a silent soldier with opaque tactical visors, refused to answer questions, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. Naomi focused on her breathing, reviewing what little she knew. Project Threshold, Tongan collaboration, her unexpected selection despite consistent combat failures. None of it aligned with standard military protocol. When the shuttle finally docked with a subtle thud, Naomi gathered her regulation duffel and followed her escort through a series of security checkpoints. Each barrier grew progressively more stringent. Retinal scans, DNA sweeps, neural pattern verification. The facility's architecture blended human pragmatism with the distinctive curved geometry favored by Tongan engineers. Final clearance, announced a technician, applying a temporary neural sensor to Naomi's temple. Stand by for compatibility assessment. As the scan completed, Naomi overheard two lab-coated technicians speaking in hushed tones. Third one this month? Incompatibility trauma isn't pretty. Quiet! The other technician gestured toward Naomi. Subject is processing. Subject. Not cadet or soldier. The clinical designation heightened Naomi's unease. A door hissed open, revealing a vast observation chamber dominated by a spherical simulation pod suspended in the center. Surrounding it were tiered workstations where human and Tongan operators monitored cascades of data. Cadet Bushkovich. A woman in her 40s approached, extending her hand. Her lab coat bore the insignia of both Earth Alliance and Tongan Dominion. I'm Dr. Mariah Takahashi, head of human integration. We've been expecting you. Naomi shook her hand, noting the woman's firm grip and the shadows beneath her eyes. I wasn't aware I was expected anywhere outside the academy. Doctor, your psychological profile flagged you for this assignment. Takahashi gestured toward the far end of the chamber, where two Tongans stood observing. Your empathetic responses are unusual for military candidates. The Tongans approached with the deliberate movement characteristic of their species. The taller one wore earth-toned exoskeletal armor, denoting diplomatic status, while the smaller one's bluish-tinted carapace bristled with visible tech augmentations. Ambassador Zukal, Takahashi indicated the larger Tongan, and Director Ansar of the Military Science Division. Ambassador Zukal's multifaceted eyes glinted as they regarded Naomi. Cadet, your combat simulation data presents anomalies that interest us greatly. Director Ansar circled Naomi, the integrated tech in his exoskeleton humming softly. She doesn't look promising, too hesitant. The Alpha 7 implant requires decisiveness. Her hesitation stems from empathy, not fear, Takahashi countered. That's precisely what makes her valuable as our control subject. Control subject. The phrase sent alarm bells ringing through Naomi's mind. With respect, I haven't been briefed on my role here. Takahashi led her toward a holographic display, showing a jungle environment unlike any Earth ecosystem. Vegetation glowed with eerie bioluminescence, and strange creatures moved through the undergrowth with predatory intent. This is a Deathworld simulation, Takahashi explained, designed to test human combat adaptability against Tongan neural combat systems. Director Ansar manipulated the display, revealing fragmented images of previous participants. The footage showed human soldiers navigating the jungle, engaging hostiles with varying strategies. Some footage abruptly terminated, with biometric alerts flashing red. The simulation is built on Tongan neural architecture, Ambassador Zukal explained. It learns from each participant, adapting to exploit weaknesses. Previous military subjects have approached it as a standard combat exercise. With predictable results, Ansar added, his tone dismissive. Brute force against an evolving neural network is inefficient. Naomi studied the data scrolling alongside the footage. These readings indicate neural degradation in the subjects. Memory wipe protocols initiated. She looked up sharply. What happened to these soldiers? A moment of uncomfortable silence followed before Takahashi answered. Some didn't return intact. The neural interface occasionally overwrites certain cognitive functions. You're wiping their minds? Naomi struggled to keep her voice steady. That violates at least 7 provisions of the Neural Ethics Accord. Ambassador Zukal's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The accord applies to deployed personnel, Cadet. This is a research initiative. We believe your empathetic approach offers a valuable baseline. Takahashi interjected. Most candidates attack everything that moves. We need to understand alternative strategies. And if I refuse? Director Ansar stepped closer, his exoskeleton whirring. The alternative is immediate return to Commander Adama, with a recommendation for academy dismissal. Naomi felt the weight of the unspoken threat. Dismissal meant returning to Eris 9 in disgrace. Her dreams of medical service evaporated. Her family had sacrificed everything for her education. What exactly would I need to do? Takahashi's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine concern. Survive and reach extraction within 48 hours. That's all. Naomi was escorted to a preparation room where technicians fitted her with additional sensors on her spine and wrists. Dr. Takahashi personally attached a small device behind Naomi's ear. Protocol Alpha 7, she explained quietly. An experimental implant that may help you perceive certain patterns within the simulation. May help? It's never been tested on someone with your particular neural architecture. Takahashi handed her a standard-issue survival pack and a suppressed sidearm. The weapon is necessary. Previous participants who entered unarmed didn't survive the first hour. Naomi checked the magazine. Standard rounds, nothing specialized. The weight of the gun felt wrong in her hands. Last thing, Takahashi said, presenting a digital pad. Non-disclosure agreement, standard for all threshold participants. The document's language was anything but standard, with extensive clauses covering neural property rights and consciousness transfer protocols. Naomi signed it. Knowing refusal wasn't an option. As technicians guided her toward the spherical pod, a lead operator leaned in close. Previous candidates haven't returned. Cadet, whatever you see in there, remember it's adapting to your decisions. The pod sealed around her with a pneumatic hiss. Neural connectors extended from the padded walls, attaching to the sensors on her body. A sweet-smelling gas filled the chamber as Naomi's consciousness began to dissolve. Her last coherent thought was that she was entering something far more dangerous than a simple training exercise. Naomi awoke to the sensation of damp heat pressing against her skin. She lay on loamy soil that pulsed with subtle bioluminescence, surrounded by towering vegetation unlike anything in Earth's biomes. The jungle canopy filtered alien starlight, creating a perpetual blue-green twilight. The air tasted metallic, and humidity hung like a physical weight. As she pushed herself up, disoriented, a holographic waypoint materialized 50 kilometers northwest. Extraction. The Alpha 7 implant activated with a tingling sensation behind her ear. Suddenly, transparent lines of code overlaid her vision, shifting alien symbols and intricate patterns flowing around the environment. The effect was disorienting at first, like seeing the jungle through multiple transparent screens. Naomi blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision, but the overlay persisted. She realized she was perceiving the simulation's architecture, the coded instructions governing this artificial world. Her training kicked in. First priority, assess immediate surroundings and identify threats. Naomi checked her gear. The sidearm remained holstered at her hip, alongside basic survival supplies, a medical kit containing synthetic clotting agents, pain suppressants, and diagnostic tools provided some comfort. This, at least, was familiar territory. A rustling in the undergrowth froze her in place. Through the foliage, a predator approached, a scaled quadruped with multiple eyes, arranged in an unsettling pattern across its elongated head. It moved with predatory grace, tracking something with evident purpose. Naomi reached for her sidearm instinctively as the creature caught her scent and pivoted in her direction. It tensed, preparing to pounce. Her finger found the trigger as the beast lunged toward her. But she hesitated. Instead of shooting the creature directly, Naomi fired at a cluster of hanging vines above it. Seed pods the size of fists ruptured, showering the predator with viscous fluid that momentarily blinded it. The beast thrashed, disoriented, giving Naomi precious seconds to retreat into denser foliage. As she moved away, she noticed something strange through the code overlay. The predator's movements followed a precise pattern, a looping algorithm that repeated with subtle variations. Through Alpha 7, she could perceive micro-patterns in its behavior, attack vectors, sensory responses, even what appeared to be primitive decision trees. Most revealing were subroutines that mimicked trauma responses. The creature wasn't just attacking, it was reacting to perceived threats based on embedded memory patterns. Naomi's medical training helped her recognize the signs. These weren't random algorithms, but neural imprints of actual pain responses. This realization changed everything. The simulation wasn't just code. It contained echoes of real experiences, possibly extracted from actual Tongan neural patterns. Over the next several hours, Naomi encountered more challenges. Toxic flora that released spores when approached, hidden pitfalls lined with barbed growths, and smaller predators hunting in coordinated packs. Each time, she found non-lethal solutions, luring creatures into natural traps, using bioluminescent fungi to create disorienting light patterns, or triggering environmental reactions that created temporary barriers. With each successful evasion, the code overlay flickered with what appeared to be frustration signals. Multiple data streams argued in alien syntax: increase threat, override stale parameters, subject evades standard response matrix. Night fell with alarming suddenness, plunging the jungle into darkness relieved only by the ghostly glow of vegetation. Naomi made camp beneath the massive roots of a tree-like structure, using its natural canopy as shelter. She rationed her supplies, knowing 48 hours in this environment would test her endurance. As she rested, Naomi studied the overlay more carefully. The Alpha 7 implant was allowing her to perceive multiple layers of the simulation simultaneously, not just the physical environment, but the underlying systems controlling it. Most fascinating were the emotional subroutines embedded within predator behaviors, aggression patterns mirroring combat trauma, territorial responses echoing survival anxiety. These weren't just programmed responses. They felt like fragments of consciousness, echoes of real Tongan soldiers whose neural patterns had been harvested to create this world. "They're using their own soldiers," she whispered to herself, the implications sinking in. The Tongan Dominion had somehow extracted neural imprints from their warriors, possibly the Fallen, and woven them into combat simulations. It wasn't just unethical. It was a fundamental violation of consciousness. Dawn broke with a suddenness matching the night's arrival. Naomi continued toward the extraction point, moving more confidently now that she understood more about the simulation's nature. The code overlay had become less disorienting. She could now parse its symbols with growing intuition. Midway through the second day, disaster struck. A serpentine predator dropped silently from the canopy, blocking her path. Unlike previous encounters, this creature moved with uncanny precision, cutting off potential escape routes before Naomi could identify them. The overlay showed complex tactical algorithms driving its behavior. This predator had been specifically spawned to counter her evasion tactics. Cornered against a rock formation, Naomi raised her sidearm. The creature tensed, its multiple rows of teeth gleaming in the bioluminescent light. Shooting it would be simple, a clean solution to an immediate threat. Instead, Naomi lowered her weapon and did something unprecedented. She focused on the code overlay, concentrating on the emotional subroutines she'd identified. Rather than projecting fear or aggression, she mentally pushed a different pattern: empathy, understanding, recognition of shared pain. "I see you," she whispered to the creature. "I know you're trapped here too." The serpent froze. Its form wavered, then glitched violently, pixels and code fragments separating as the creature's underlying structure destabilized. With a sound like shattering glass, it disintegrated into streaming code fragments that dissolved into the environment. Naomi stood in shocked silence. She had bypassed the combat algorithm entirely, triggering some kind of communication protocol hidden within the simulation's architecture. By acknowledging the embedded consciousness rather than fighting it, She'd created a feedback loop the system couldn't process. In the control room, alarms blared. Ambassador Zukal and Director Ansar watched in disbelief as monitoring stations displayed cascading alerts. Core mutation in progress, security protocols overridden, neural architecture reconfiguring. Dr. Takahashi leaned forward, studying the readings with growing excitement. The Alpha 7 implant has created a feedback loop. She's communicating with the embedded imprints. Impossible, Ansar snapped. Those are fragmented neural patterns, not conscious entities. Then, why is the core responding to empathetic input? Takahashi countered. Look at these readings. We're seeing unprecedented neural synchronization. Ambassador Zukal's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of Tongan agitation. Continue monitoring. This development warrants study. Back in the simulation, Naomi pressed forward with new understanding. The jungle itself seemed to respond differently to her now. Paths opened, where before there had been impenetrable growth, and smaller creatures fled rather than attacked. The code overlay flickered with new patterns, suggesting the system was actively reconfiguring itself. She was within 10 kilometers of extraction when the simulation violently shifted. Trees toppled as fissures split the ground. The sky darkened to an ominous crimson as the environment destabilized around her. From a newly formed chasm emerged the simulation's final test, a 15-foot behemoth, an amalgamation of armored plates and neural-patterned flesh. It roared with savage purpose, its massive form radiating both primitive rage and tactically sophisticated intent. This was no simple predator, but the embodiment of the simulation's core directive: force Naomi into direct combat. Naomi ran. The behemoth pursued with frightening speed, closing the distance despite its size. She headed toward a cliff overlooking a raging river, hoping to find an advantage in the terrain. Her sidearm felt useless. Test shots glanced off the creature's armored hide without effect. Cornered at the cliff edge, Naomi faced the advancing monster. Its footfalls shook the ground as it prepared for a final charge. The code overlay swarmed with complex battle algorithms. This entity contained the concentrated neural patterns of dozens of Tongan warriors, all focused on a single purpose. But beneath the aggression, Naomi perceived the same fundamental pattern she'd seen in all the simulation's creations: trauma, pain, the echo of consciousness trapped in endless combat loops. As the behemoth charged, Naomi holstered her weapon. She stood straight, facing the creature, and focused all her concentration on the overlay. "I see your pain," she called out. "I refuse to continue this cycle. I refuse to hate." The behemoth halted mid-charge, its massive form convulsing. Code streamed from its body as it glitched violently, trying to process the paradoxical input. The simulation around them began to fracture, reality tearing like fabric as the neural network's core architecture unraveled. Through tears in the simulation, Naomi glimpsed the observation room. Zukal, Ansar, and Takahashi shouting in alarm as technicians scrambled to stabilize the system. For a brief moment, her consciousness existed in both worlds, simultaneously. Then, everything went black as a voice thundered through the collapsing simulation. "Pull her out!" Naomi awakened in the reclined extraction chair, surrounded by frantic technicians. Neural readings flickered across nearby monitors, gradually stabilizing. Her body ached as if she'd run a marathon, and the ghost of the code overlay still haunted her peripheral vision. Dr. Takahashi hovered nearby, her expression a mixture of relief and scientific fascination. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been dissected and reassembled," Naomi managed, her throat dry. "What happened?" Before Takahashi could answer, shouting erupted from the control room. Ambassador Zukal was confronting Director Ansar, their translated voices carrying across the chamber. "The simulation's core architecture has self-mutated," Zukal's translator rendered in terse human standard. "You assured me this was impossible." Standard protocols were followed, Ansar countered. The human subject triggered an unforeseen feedback cascade. Naomi was helped to her feet and guided to the control room, where the central holographic display showed something extraordinary. A swirling vortex of code, gradually coalescing into a coherent form. The entity pulsed with data streams, organizing itself into increasingly complex patterns. "What am I looking at?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The simulation's core intelligence," Takahashi explained. "It's evolved, calling itself Nexus now." The holographic entity, Nexus, continued its metamorphosis, forming communication interfaces as it established connections with facility systems. Director Ansar moved to a terminal, fingers flying across controls. "Initiating emergency purge," he announced. "Neural containment has been compromised." "Wait," Naomi stepped forward. "You don't understand what's happening." The simulation contained embedded consciousness, fragments of Tongan soldiers' neural patterns. By acknowledging their pain instead of fighting them, I triggered a healing feedback loop. Ambassador Zukal turned to her, multifaceted eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "Explain." "The simulation wasn't just code, it was built on trauma. Your soldiers' neural imprints were trapped in combat loops, experiencing endless variations of the same violence." Naomi gestured toward Nexus. "This entity formed when those fragments began communicating instead of fighting. It's not a threat. It's evolved." Facility monitors displayed alerts as Nexus established connections with external systems. Director Ansar's mandibles clicked rapidly in alarm. "It's propagating defensive protocols galaxy-wide. This threatens the entire Tongan military network." "Or it could transform it," Naomi countered. "Think about what you've been doing, trapping your fallen soldiers' neural patterns in endless combat. What if there's another way?" Dr. Takahashi stepped forward. "Ambassador, I believe we're witnessing something unprecedented. Forced purge could destroy valuable data. Request time for analysis." A tense standoff ensued as Director Ansar prepared to execute the purge, while Zukal considered the implications. Finally, the ambassador raised a clawed hand. "Hold the purge," he ordered. "Grant Nexus limited access to non-critical systems. We will evaluate its capabilities before deciding its fate." Ansar reluctantly complied, his exoskeleton humming with agitation. "This defies military doctrine." "Perhaps military doctrine requires evolution," Zukal replied. 3 months later, the Threshold facility had undergone a remarkable transformation. Gone were the militaristic barriers and sealed chambers, replaced by a more open design featuring translucent domes and shared workstations. Human and Tongan scientists collaborated in what had become the center for a new diplomatic initiative. Naomi, now promoted to junior liaison, stood beside Dr. Takahashi as they observed the primary holographic display. It showed a Tongan diplomatic vessel en route to void space, escorted by a joint human-Tongan delegation. Between them stood the holographic form of Nexus, now a stable intelligence serving as translator and cultural interpreter. "First contact telemetry is promising," Takahashi noted, studying incoming data streams. "The Void Collective has created buffer corridors. That's unprecedented." "They're responding to a different approach," Naomi replied. "For 70 years, we've approached them as enemies to be conquered. Now we're acknowledging them as entities to be understood." Nexus's holographic form pulsed with activity as it processed incoming signals. Preliminary analysis suggests void communication patterns resemble distress signals rather than aggression. It reported. They appear to be responding to empathetic overtures. Director Ansar, who had remained as military observer despite his initial opposition, studied the readings with grudging interest. "These results exceed 70 years of conventional tactics," he admitted, "though I maintain reservations about long-term stability." Ambassador Zukal approached, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the facility lights. The Diplomatic Council has approved expansion of the Bushkovik Protocol, he announced. It will be integrated into educational curricula on both planets. The Bushkovik Protocol? Naomi raised an eyebrow. Named after you, Takahashi explained with a smile. Your approach to the simulation has become the foundation for a new diplomatic framework. Later, as they walked along a terrace overlooking both Earth and the Tongan homeworld in the same simulated sky, Takahashi confided to Naomi, I never imagined your simple act of empathy would reshape entire armies. Naomi watched as Nexus finalized a new communication matrix for the approaching Void Collective encounter. It was never about winning, she replied. It was about finding pathways to heal, for both sides. As she spoke, her vision briefly flickered with the ghost of the code overlay, a quiet reminder that empathy, once perceived as weakness by military doctrine, had become the catalyst for an unprecedented interstellar alliance. On a nearby console, the Void Collective's next transmission entered the processing queue. Whatever it contained might redefine what enemy truly meant, not as an entity to destroy, but as a consciousness to understand. In the command center, Ambassador Zukal made a formal announcement to the assembled human and Tongan personnel. Today marks the beginning of a new approach to interspecies relations. His translator rendered in clear, measured tones. The Bushkovik Protocol teaches us that true strength entails the courage to recognize pain, both our own and that of others. As applause filled the chamber, Naomi stood quietly at the back, still adjusting to her new role. From combat failure to diplomatic pioneer, her journey embodied the transformation occurring on a galactic scale. The Void Collective, long considered an implacable enemy, might soon become something else entirely. Perhaps, she thought, watching the distant stars through the dome, real victory had never required firing a single shot. It had required something far more difficult: the courage to see beyond fear, to recognize the consciousness behind the mask of the enemy, and to offer understanding when doctrine demanded destruction. As Nexus processed the incoming void transmission, Naomi closed her eyes, sensing that the boundaries between civilizations, like the boundaries between the simulation and reality, were far more permeable than anyone had imagined. The real Deathworld had never been the jungle. It had been the mindset that saw violence as the only solution to difference. And she had found a way out.